So before we jump into this episode of the show to be named later, we're going to start with a special live reaction to the new Superman trailer. Andy and I are going to watch it for the first time and record our reaction. So here we go. Oh. Oh my God.
Crypto. Home. Baby, home.
Superman.
All right, Andy and Jim are back here with the show to be named later. We have just watched the Superman teaser for the first time. Yes, these are man tears. Andy, you and I have a little bit different taste in comics. You're a little bit more a Marvel guy than I am, but Superman hits us. The theme, seeing Crypto. Overall, what were your first impressions of it, of the teaser? I like that Crypto. Part of me wants Crypto to be like a lab, but just overall first impression.
Crypto doesn't need to be a lab. Crypto just needs to exist, and he does, and that's
does.
the best part of this. I've got questions. I mean, the thing that I'm not looking for negatives, so don't take this way, but
sure,
I don't need Guy Gardner's horrible haircut because that's a horrible Guy Gardner haircut. I'm hoping that's going to get fixed in post. And I don't understand why Mr. Terrific has become central to the DCU somehow, but those are very minor things.
Sure.
I'm all in for Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, and frankly,
Already
nothing I just saw made me fall any less in love with her. Yeah,
right.
And nothing I just saw made me be less in love with her. It's giving very Richard Donner, very Christopher Reeve vibes, as the kids would say. I'm all in. It looks. You may give or take depending on how you feel about the MCU or James Gunn. I think that he is relying on the source material to the point that fans are going to embrace this character rather than reject this character, and that's what I hope for. This is a guy who took literally a cast-off title for Marvel and made it probably one of their best pieces of the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Pile on that, like one of Jessica's favorite series of movies, and that's exactly your point. She's not into any of that stuff in those movies.
And he now has not only good source material, but the source material as far as comic book characters go. I am all for a fresh retelling. I love the idea that it's starting in action. I love the idea that Luthor is going to be a fully formed character and we don't have to go through his I lost my hair and I hate people because of it thing.
And I'm still in real estate schemes.
Yeah. I mean, they could get him to the point of being president at this point, like he was in the comics, and I'd be okay with it. But just fully formed Luthor Corp at its height of its evil. I like the tie-ins. I love what James Gunn has said yesterday about nothing that happens this movie is in the movie solely to build up to another movie. This is a standalone story. It's part of a larger universe, but if you never see another one of those films, which I'm sure he doesn't want you to do, you're going to be able to love this movie on its own. So I'm 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, 2 thumbs up. But I love that you liked it too, because I will say one of the things I will be guilty of is I'm a pretty big comic book movie apologist anyway, and then particularly a Superman movie apologist. But I do feel like this feels like Superman, and it's not just because of the way they worked the theme in, which I think was genius, especially having 2 very different scores in the beginning and the end. But also it feels like not only what Man of Steel should have been, but it feels like almost what Singer wanted to do with Superman Returns, but felt too force-fed by making it a direct sequel to something that came before, as opposed to, there's not an origin story. This could be anybody's Superman. This can be Tom Welling, if that's what you grew up with. It could be Christopher Reeve, if that's what we grew up with. It doesn't matter because he's Superman. It's the same character. And now we're going to go to see him be that character. And I want to give a real shout out to the MCU, because I don't know if they didn't figure out how to do Captain America, that you would see this kind of Superman, because everybody used to claim you can't write a character that's good because there's nothing interesting. And I think Marvel definitely proved that with Captain America, that you can. And man, I'm in. I can't get here fast enough. And not just because
not to get too geeky on the storylines, but there's a lot of imagery that's happening here from All-Star Superman, which I guess is 15 years old now. It's not a new not a new title, but maybe one of the best recent takes of the character in DC's numerous attempts to keep him relevant. And sometimes I think they overshoot a little bit, but that was probably my favorite one of those efforts. And so I'm hoping that Gunn is not just taking imagery, but some of that ethos about what a Kryptonian on Earth would be dealing with. Because it's really interesting. I mean, if you read some of the James Gunn, obviously there's a lot of James Gunn articles out right now, but he's talking about who do you like better, Superman or Clark Kent, and who do you relate to better, Superman or Clark Kent? And he said something along the lines of, you can't really know the character unless you understand both of them.
Yeah. So
if you only know Superman, then you don't really know the character. If you only know Clark Kent, you don't really know the character. So it's not a matter of Clark Kent is Kal-El's alter ego, or vice versa. They're the same person, but it's the gymnastics that Kal-El has had to put himself through since he realized who he was and what he was.
What I love, I saw somebody had done a poster comparison between the teaser poster for Superman and then the teaser poster for the Batman, and how he really, in the argument was, they should be in the same universe because they're so pitch perfect for those characters, where Superman is both people, and Batman, at the end of the day, Bruce Wayne is the mask. And I think both of those characters relating in the same universe would have been a really interesting narrative choice. I will say this, because we definitely have some stuff to get to. We have a guest online who is waiting to pop in.
Patiently waiting.
Sorry, Jeff. But I will say that the best thing I heard from James Gunn, I was watching an interview with him yesterday, and they asked him, like, all right, what's up with Brave and the Bold, and what's up with Booster Gold? Because there's talk of a Booster Gold casting, which I love if it happens. But he said the scripts aren't ready. And that's, I think, the key. The scripts aren't ready. So they're not going to get made until the scripts are ready, because he's been in the MCU. And I think he was there at the end of it because Guardians 3 is arguably the best MCU movie that's come out in the last 2 or 3 years, because I think they did get a little over their skis and a little overextended by building that. And, the main villain being an abuser doesn't help, because they have to redo that. But I don't know. Final thoughts?
Is it a problem that actors are scumbags?
It can be.
And Jeff, by the way, is throwing comments up in the comment section.
Is he really?
Yeah. He wants to join the conversation.
Let me just bring him in then and join the conversation. We are joined by first of all, excellent minor league baseball hat. You knew your audience. This is Jeff Candid comes from Bricks Behind the Ivy. All right, Jeff, before we talk Cubs, and I've even got an inside Cubs joke at your expense, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, I'm going to quibble with Deadpool versus Wolverine. I don't fully buy that as an MCU film. Anyway.
No, that's fair. And I think that's why it's the best of what's come out recently, because it's not, which is one of the things that I love about James Gunn's recent comment about making the movies more like how Star Wars used to be made, just like in the universe with like maybe a toss in, but like the story isn't centralized on getting to a certain point.
Yeah, I think you made an excellent point with the scripts being ready, being kind of central to releasing a movie or filming a movie, even casting a movie. Because I think what the MCU did when it was good, so let's say up until Endgame, is they were actually worried about the script and telling a story, and they got away from that because they were worried about a calendar. The MCEU was only about a calendar. And that's, you just had dud after dud after dud being released. And there were some okay movies in that. I don't want to crap on the entire DCEU experience. But by and large, when you give Snyder that kind of reign and tell him he has to keep to a calendar, and then you have the notorious Warner Brothers meddling going on, it's not a great combination as far as quality storytelling.
I will also, to Jeff's point, I think the reason why Deadpool versus Wolverine and Guardians 3 were the only really good examples since Endgame is because both of those creators had enough clout that they're going to do what they wanted to do with characters they understood. Ryan Reynolds knows Deadpool better than anybody. We're not going to see a Deadpool movie that doesn't have him. And I think James Gunn, same thing, versus everything else, pardon intended, were guns for hire that were directing films. And therefore, you can have all of the integrity as a directors you want, but the guys writing the checks are going to be able to make final decisions. That's not always bad. The argument is that the director's cut of Rogue One was not as good as when Kathleen Kennedy said, this doesn't work, we need to adjust some things. So it's not always a bad thing, but I do think, I think all of us understand media enough to know that it's always better to see someone's take versus a bunch of people's take that water down what we're getting. So look, I'm giddy. I can't be more excited.
What's making me even more giddy is that, Jeff, your basement is fantastic.
Oh, we got to. Yeah, well, I guess let's. Yeah, Jeff, you want to find a word on the trailer, and then we'll jump in.
If you can look back there, there's a section in which I pay homage to my God, Henry Cavill, who I thought was the ultimate Superman with some of just the crummiest just luck in being able to land a standalone movie after Man of Steel, which I thought was a good enough start. Yeah, and then they had to jump into this universe that Warner Brothers wants so bad, and just everything after that. All the casting in the DCEU was fantastic. They had the best set of people, but like the movies.
Cavill's bad luck up to it, including the CGI lip, right?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
but like if
it's not a real mustache, by the way. It's CGI.
But it moved on its own as if independent from his face.
We can blame Tom Cruise on that one because he's like, no, you're not shaving the mustache for MI, whatever that was. But I will say this. Cavill wants to be in this kind of Superman movie, and he was very clear. Like if you notice, whenever the whole Snyder cut came out, he was the only actor that wasn't but he was the only actor not demanding the Snyder cut because he actually liked how Whedon reworked how Superman was. You know, I thought Man of Steel was a great movie, even though I didn't like. And again, I didn't even love some of the choices, but I respected the choices. Jonathan Kent, that's a way to go. And I get it, even though I don't love it. But then I think that Snyder never really understood Superman. I think Nolan didn't, but knew that Goyer did. And that's how you get Man of Steel. And then Snyder's off and running. And then we get what we get after that. Beyond the fact that Martha's, they're both their mother's first name. And that's apparently enough to stop two people from fighting. Martha! First of all, I do have a little bit of a troll move for Jeff as he's on. So a little bit about Jeff. He runs actually my favorite non-Astros podcast. Puts a lot of work, a lot of effort, which is why he fits right in with this little crew. But I am wearing a Holman, Indiana shirt, which is where the old man lives, and he's a big White Sox fan. He's got some clodhoppers and some utility infielders on the old White Sox. But okay, so Jeff, you guys don't have a utility infielder. You guys got Kyle Tucker. It's funny that we're doing this episode now, Andy, because I got a text from a mutual friend of mine yesterday morning. I will not out him, who says, I'm surprised he didn't go full Trump and type it in all caps, but it was Dana Brown is the worst GM in the history of baseball. He gave away Kyle Tucker for 3 pieces of garbage. I'm going to reflect that one of the pieces of garbage was a reigning all-star, but Jeff, please explain to us whether we did or didn't get garbage and kind of starting with Paredes, what we got in return for Kyle Tucker.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really interesting. Paredes to me, for you guys, is Alex Bregman insurance that can also play first base. I think, Jim, you were recently on my show, and we talked about, the league worst first base production in the last few years for the Astros. And I think if you look at the numbers,
although don't mention that because one of their wives gets really pissy if you criticize her.
If you look at the numbers, the Cubs are right there until Michael Busch last year. And Cody Bellinger didn't really play enough there to qualify for his offense's numbers in 2023. So the Cubs have had a first base problem for a long time. And we had the summer of Frank the Tank Schwindel, who's now just hitting a ton of home runs out in Korea. And his friend Patrick Wisdom, who was part of the rebuild teams, is also now joining him in Korea. Those guys are going to kill it out there. Because they throw a lot more fastballs and they feast on fastballs, where in the major leagues, if you only can hit a fastball, you stop seeing them. Like that's just how the game works. But in other parts of the world,
why Trey Cabbage is evidently headed there too.
But yeah, from the Cubs side of things, it's interesting. There's a lot of fan uproar, and I think a lot of it has to do with more of the financial side of this potentially, is the Cubs have not divvied out in recent memory, besides Jason Hayward, a long-term high-value contract, even though that they make the money of the teams that have handed out tons of long-term high-value contracts, like the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers.
Yeah, as we pointed out on your show, the value of the Cubs franchise is very similar to the Yankees. It's not the Dodgers, but no one is, but it's very close.
Yeah, based on their current revenues, the Cubs are they are the 3rd highest revenue gaining team in baseball, but they are 22nd in how much of the revenue they make goes into payroll. So that's a pretty significant difference. That's 47% of their revenue goes back to players. So where's all that money going?
So Jeff, for reference, every Astros fan on Twitter will tell you that Jim Crane is the cheapest man that ever lived. And our ratios aren't quite that. So
yeah, and it's frustrating. I don't know what the right answer is across baseball, because you look at the Dodgers. Every baseball fan looks at the Dodgers and they sit here and they go, "I want my team to do that." And on one side of the coin, every team is probably capable of doing things like that. It's whether or not their ownership wants to. I feel like it's a much larger conversation, not what you've brought me on to talk about today. But in the Cubs case, there is legitimate frustration. This is as some people, one of the jewels of baseball, like the big Midwestern market team. If there was no Cubs, the Midwestern market in baseball doesn't exist. And that might feel like a little bit of hubris, but the WGN element and how nationally distributed they were before, there are Cub fans everywhere. Yeah. And that's the reason the Midwest market for baseball is as strong as it's been. And, blackout regions and stuff like that and WGN dismantling to try to be like a drama type station and leaning away from sports and all the financial components of what's changed about distribution of baseball. That has hurt technically, I feel like, the national brand, but it's not hurting the pocketbooks of the owners for the Cubs, because you still see there's tons of people like me in Chicago who have basements that look more ridiculous than mine.
First of all, it's awesome, not ridiculous. I actually have office envy. I have office envy, and my office is epic. So
you're not going to get any basement hate on this show.
Yeah, unless my wife gets into the comment board, I think I'll be okay.
My wife not even aware I do the show, so that helps.
it's interesting for the Cubs perspective. On Twitter, there's been a lot of frustration with how much we gave up in this deal. And the frustration is tied to, I would say, a little bit of prospect hugging and concern that we are going to have Kyle Tucker for 1 year and he's going to walk out the door because of just a disinterest in paying a player more than 5-6 years at a time and more than $25 million. And it stinks because there is a ton of recent history and examples of the core walking out the door, which I would argue was 100% the correct decision on every one of those players, besides maybe Anthony Rizzo, just because first base is a hard position to fill, and his career hasn't been a complete nightmare since he's left Chicago, where like Chris Bryant and Javier Baez, like the back of the baseball cards getting real scary, where when they were on the Cubs, it's like, are these guys going to be fringe Hall of Famers? Are we going to be retiring their flags? Now it's like, maybe you shouldn't even mention them in baseball conversations. They've been that bad. Like that's so, yeah, on a Cubs perspective, like this was a heavy pay, and the jewel of the trade to me is Cam Smith. The guy's
talk to us about Cam Smith a little bit.
Yeah, he was the Cubs' first round pick in the 2024 draft. NC State, advanced bat. The Cubs have been very good in the last 3 to 5 years of drafting high college ready bats that seem to like have this ability to perform almost immediately. That seems to be like this front office's wheelhouse. Examples in that are actually on the major league team. Ian Happ was a high-end college bat. He was a switch hitter, second baseman at the time. He's now a 3-time Gold Glove outfielder. Yes, he's not like what you would say in a lot of people. He's not the front of a franchise. He's not the guy you're out marketing, but he is. You could write down his stat line on a piece of paper and be within 1 to 2% error of that, and it would be completely fine. Just a really consistent, solid baseball player, which they don't get the celebration that a lot of other players, like the sexy names of like Soto, Ohtani, but those are guys you absolutely need to win. So that's a good find. Matt Shaw, Cubs #1 prospect, advanced college hitter. They drafted last year. He's probably, at least at this moment, going to be the Cubs opening day third baseman. He's tinier guy. His swing, his game, everything looks like Dustin Pedroia, which is a really, truly an unfair comparison because there's Dustin Pedroia and no one else really in that size to production. Jose Altuve is probably in that group,
Right.
But the laser show was super fun when it was working, and the guy just fell off a cliff after a few years. And I don't know if it just took a lot on his body to do what he did because he just wasn't a big guy. Matt Shaw, 5'9", but Cam Smith was the guy that I think as a Cub fan we all got excited about. He had that classic like superstar build, like 6'3", 6'4", muscular. Looks like he could put on him a few more muscles and just a natural power swing with a really good batting eye. He started his professional career with 6 straight games of home runs, one of them with 2 home runs in it. So he hit 7 home runs in 6 games, like right away at Myrtle Beach. And he was in South Bend and within a week in which he hit 2 more home runs there. And he finished the year just absolutely on fire. Very similar to Matt Shaw. Matt Shaw did the exact same thing, not home runs wise, but just came and just was clearly a hitter, just could hit the ball anywhere. And Matt Shaw was an excellent hitter last year through the minor league system. So like this is a guy that I think could be your third baseman like as soon as 2026. And he's got a very solid glove, and that bat has extreme upside because he's not done growing. He's not done putting on muscle. And he's a pull hitter, and you guys have the Crawford boxes. Like this guy could be a star.
One of the things that I wanted Andy to weigh in on, because we were talking about it on your show, how essentially the rebuild for both teams started about the same time, 2012, at least the teardown did. And the Astros, on one hand, we cannot call this run unprecedented and then be surprised that there's going to be a hiccup. Like that's a reason And Andy, starting with you, what you've heard from him, and also just even if it's a down year, it doesn't mean the end of anything long term. And I believe that this was a move as much for 2026 to his point as it was for maybe getting some wiggle room for 2025 and having an upgrade at first base if they do bring back Bregman, which I still think they have as good a chance as anybody to do.
Yeah, we can talk about the Bregman thing. I think the Astros lost a little bit of leverage yesterday, but it remains to be seen how much that matters. Yeah, it's a deal for this year because we needed a first baseman, and as Jeff mentioned, insurance for third base in case we don't come up with somebody else. So Isaac Paredes provides that. Cam Smith is a 2026 guy, and I really wish Astros fans who evidently discovered the minor leagues last year, maybe the year before, would – you talk about prospect hugging. Everybody who plays for us in the PCL, and I don't know, I'm sure you're aware, the PCL – if you play in Reno, you're going to have great stats.
Yep.
If you have a lot of road trips to that part of the world, those stats are going to look fantastic. And our fans can't differentiate between a prospect and a guy who is a quadruple A player, basically. Pedro Leon for us is probably the best example of that. He's a 26-year-old outfielder who hits well in AAA and can't see a baseball in Houston. So Cam Smith answers a question because, as we've talked about on this show, and I'm sure you're aware, we had a little, what do you call it, cheating scandal back in 20.
I like to call it the great hiccup.
What?
Little thing. I don't know if they made the news up there. And you hear a lot from other fan bases about how the Astros weren't penalized. Well, we were. We lost 4 draft picks.
Yes.
And the reason that Cam Smith comes in and is immediately our best prospect is because we don't have those 4 draft picks from 2020 and 2021 who would normally be sitting in that spot right now.
And then you've also been using the ones you did have to buy all these other players that have come in. And to your point, to Andy's point, Jeff, like when we traded for Kikuchi, these were guys that were projected to be replacement level players, but you would have thought we traded the future of the franchise. If we're going to get mad at a trade, probably the one that they did to get Verlander back the year before is probably the one they gave up the most actual capital for. So, yeah, it's funny to watch. Andy, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, you're fine. I mean, so to y'all's point, Paredes answers a question now. Smith answers a question for the next 7 years, which is great. I'm actually really excited about Hayden Wesneski, and that's part of – I think that his performance has been a little bit up and down, as you would expect. But 2 years ago, he was your number 5, number 4 prospect in the Cubs organization. He's very high up there from what I've read. And he's a guy that I think that he gets into the Houston pitching lab where we take guys who have had some success and build on that. Garrett Cole being a great example of that. And build on that. He's a guy, if talk a little bit about him, because I'm really excited about what he seems to be able to bring in what Dana Brown, our GM, is calling a starting role.
First of all, let me explain why he really cares, Jeff, because one, he's a Pollock from Houston, and we feel that very much.
I mean, there's some of that, but
first of all, I think this was, from a Cubs perspective, getting Hayden Wesneski was a really crafty deal from Jed Hoyer. And, I think for Cub fans that are listening, potentially, they don't give him his flowers when he does good things. They really jump on him when things aren't going well.
It's really all the same, isn't it? It doesn't matter.
And it's interesting too. And I think that's why we probably have fan bases reacting the same. So when you go through the type of rebuild that both of our teams went through, there's a re-education of the fan base to love prospects, because clearly the major league club takes a backseat. There's no sugarcoating it any different way. But then when the back end of that happens and you need prospects to supplement, then you fall in love with these people because you've been trained to keep an eye on these people for I personally, from the outside, Forrest Whitley was my guy for years. And he's not panned out to be what everybody thought he was going to be, which is to me an example of why you should never prospect hug, because right now, the value of these guys, their rankings, all these things are just projections. And the distance between AAA and the major leagues is larger than it's ever been. Until these guys succeed at the major league level, they're all lottery tickets. And if your lottery tickets can get a guy, in our case, like Kyle Tucker, who is an extremely productive hitter, you can have all the lotto tickets. I don't care. It's about winning at the major league level at the end of the day. Everything else is not guaranteed. So it's hard to retrain your brain, though, when you go through a painful 4 to 5 year rebuild or retool of your organization, and they're telling you, please keep coming to the games. Look at these guys that are coming. So then you just keep looking for the things that are coming because you want to be the one that sees it first. But I'll get back to Hayden Wesneski because that was the original question. Hayden Wesneski got a bad rap in Chicago. I was always a big fan of him when the Cubs traded Scott Effross to the Yankees. A guy with a lot of control, really interesting arm angle, potentially was like a closer type pitcher just because of the arm angle and the interestingness. He'll be a good part of the Yankees. He needed Tommy John shortly after that trade, but Hayden Wesneski didn't really fit in the Yankees organization at the time, and he's got starter upside. His biggest issue is he struggles getting left-handed hitters out. He needs a new pitch in order to get a lefty out. He's been working on a changeup that looked promising last year. The biggest thing with Wisniewski's numbers last year is I think people take away the human element of baseball too much because baseball is an extremely mental game since it's designed entirely around the idea of failure. Hayden Wesneski, at the beginning of last season, he was stretched out at the end of spring training, and they stopped using him in spring training games because they wanted him to be starting depth. They decided, hey, like your changeups worked out, let's get you to AAA. Let's have you throw 4 or 5 innings at a time. So when somebody gets hurt, Justin Steele got hurt in the 3rd inning of the first game, and they called him, and he was in a car at 3 a.m. to get him to Texas because they were playing the Rangers at Globe Life, and he was in that rotation to fill in for Justin Steele. And then after they found out that Ben Brown, another guy from the Cubs, was a better option in the rotation, and the bullpen started falling apart, they had all these injuries. Julian Merriweather, Edward Alzolay, all these guys in the back of the bullpen for the Cubs. Hey, he's got this nice sweeper. Let's use him in high leverage. But if you train a guy to be stretched out for 5 innings and you ask him in 2 weeks to now, hey, throw all your explosive stuff in for 20 pitches, that's just not. That's such a huge change, and he struggled. He gave up a lot of home runs, and it's because he was going out there and trying to find the command of his fastball and leaving it right down the middle of the plate. And it's just not. He doesn't have a special fastball. He has a special sweeper. So I think if you can tinker with the number of pitches he uses, if you intend for him to stay in one spot, either a bullpen piece or a rotation piece, he's going to be very successful because that sweeper plays super, super well. If you even look at Baseball Savant, he has a little bit different of a movement profile, a lot more sharp drop than the average sweeper in baseball. And that's why it's hard to pick up because of how his fastball moves. And his cutter has the same action as well, but it stays on kind of a more horizontal plane. So he can mix that pitch grip with the sweeper and the cutter and just be an extremely effective weapon. And he still touches 95. And another thing for Jed Hoyer, credit where credit's due, he takes care of players sometimes in these trades. He sent Hayden Wesneski home. I feel and the Cubs do stuff like that intentionally. Cody Bellinger in that deal, I think there's probably a better deal out there. Cody Bellinger's dad played for the Yankees. It's where I think he wanted to go. His agent would definitely want him to go because if he's a star there, Scott Boras is going to be licking his lips in the pre-commission. That's something that really fits the type of ball player he is. He's going to be in a winning environment, and he gets to go somewhere where it's a household name for him. His dad was there. He grew up in the clubhouse there. Jed Hoyer Cubs organization does a pretty solid job of taking care of players in those situations. And it's really cool that Hayden Wesneski gets to pitch for his hometown team.
Yeah, and I do think we saw it with Kikuchi too, Andy, that the Astros, the pitching lab, as we call it, they didn't get him if they didn't think that they could make him a piece. And, I'll open this question up to both of you guys. Does it seems fitting that they get this guy that had experience pitching in a bullpen or starting, immediately name him a starter? Does that mean that Valdez could get moved, do you think, or at a minimum at the deadline? I mean, it seems like if you're going to move Tucker, you might as well move Fromber, and I think you end up getting more for him. Andy, I'll have you go with that first.
Yeah, I just think it means that the Astros have options. You have a player that at worst profiles to be a really high leverage 7th inning kind of guy to pair with Abreu and Hader at the back end of that bullpen. I think that's worst case for Wesneski. Dana Brown would like him to be a starter because we do have a Fromber Valdez issue. We have a Lance McCullers Jr. issue. We have a Christian Javier issue. We have a lot of starting pitchers on our 40-man roster, but I don't know how many of them are going to be available depending on what month in 2025 you're talking about. So I think Wesneski is a healthy arm, a live arm, and the Astros have been very successful at convincing guys to sequence their pitches in ways that make them more successful. It's not even so much a matter of teaching them a new pitch or relying on one thing over the other. It's more of, and even Verlander has said that, showing them data and showing them a way to take the things they already have and using them in a way that maximizes their performance. And if you're a pitcher that buys into that, I think you're really great. We've had some examples of pitchers who don't buy into it. Dallas Keuchel being one of them, which was just weird to me because he was never successful once he left Houston.
Except for
I'm still of the Astros generation that has nightmares about Kerry Wood and Carlos Zambrano. So I'm treading lightly here.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I have several Kerry Wood 20 strikeout game pieces of memorabilia. Like, that's one of the more prominent memories.
You had a personal tour of the 20th strikeout, didn't you, Joe?
I not only did I get a tour of the 20th strikeout, I had the mistake of wearing an Astros jersey, hat on, and I got called out during the tour about the Kerry Wood 28 strikeout game. Yeah, it was very
1998.
Sad. The game that every Chicagoan claims they were at.
Yeah, no, I know I wasn't there, but I do know I had just come home from just a hearty day of the second grade and popped on WGN and realized like what was going on pretty quickly. Yeah. But like once I finished my coloring homework, I was allowed to watch the television. But I think Framber is an interesting situation for the Astros. Another. The contract's probably a little higher than they want to pay, trying to figure out what they are in 2025. Like last year, they had a really rough start to the season and still like came out of that division. Like I don't see any world beaters out west. The Rangers, not sure if they're going to be as bad as they were last year, but that was really Jekyll Hyde. Was not expecting the huge hangover that they ended up having. They had a lot of injuries as well. The A's are, I'm going to put in parentheses or quotes, trying. I don't know what.
Yeah, they got to show the loyal fans of Sacramento something.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
All 11,000.
All 11,000.
Yeah. Don't worry, they're going to leave them too. Like they're going to Vegas. Like it's the only thing they're good at is breakups. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what the West is. The Angels, who knows what the hell they're doing ever. I don't understand that organization. They've had the best player. They've at one point had two of the best players in baseball, and they have one of the worst contracts ever signed at third base. And a guy who has actively said that he doesn't even like playing baseball. And like, let's step back even a few years back. They gave CJ Wilson a whole ton of money to never pitch for them because he was too busy buying Mazda dealerships in Chicago. Not a joke. And he got hurt racing Miatas because he races Mazda Miatas in the offseason and never pitched because of that. And there was no opt-out. They had to pay that guy to sit and race Miatas and buy Mazda dealerships for like 6 years. Like, that's just absolutely
what size rubber band do you have to wind up to race a Miata? Or is that like one of those things?
Hey, my dad worked for Mazda for 20 years, so I got
okay, but the Miata is a bar of soap. It's a bar of soap that fits the guy.
It's one of those things that when you're in traffic, you can get under a semi. So like, there's never.
There you go. Yes. Very Griswold of you.
Very. Before we go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
The last thing on Framber is he's a heavy ground ball pitcher. So I think a team that's going to be interested in him is going to need pretty superior infield defense. So I think that limits the market for him, or teams won't understand that that's something they need for him to be successful and will trade for him. And his numbers won't fight because he's going to have like just an absolute ludicrous BABIP against, because like let's say a team like the White Sox get Framber, not that they would try to get Framber, but that would just be like watching like Bozo buckets again across the infield. He would have like a 7 ERA and like a 293 FIP. That would just be a disaster.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we end the show, Jeff, we are also we do a lot of things here. College football being one of them. You got any thoughts on the opening playoff games? I think Texas and Clemson. You've got. And then a bunch of other games that don't matter. Ohio State, I guess. Ohio State.
I would guess he probably has an opinion on Notre Dame, Indiana, based on geography alone.
I do have an opinion on that, and it's a hateful one. Being from the South Side of Chicago, I've never understood why people who have Irish descent love Notre Dame. like to a point where like it absolutely drives me bonkers. So go Hoosiers. I almost went to music school there, so I have a soft spot for IU, and I went to an Indiana college, so like college basketball is more my thing. So like IU has always been kind of a fun thing to follow. But I mean, being a mid-major guy, like the CFP does not entertain me as much as it entertains other people. I used to kind of like Clemson because of one of my degrees is from there, but Dabo Swinney's problematic is the word I'll use. So I can't root for that guy. So I'll wait for the coach to change. But beyond that, I really, really, really want to see just a stream, maybe even like a Red Sea's worth of Catholic tears as the Hoosiers stomp Notre Dame in South Bend. It would just bring me so much joy.
Wow. Well, speaking as one half of the Catholic broadcast team, I'm all with you. I can't stand Notre Dame.
Wow. Well,
and I may have just been excommunicated just for saying that. I don't
know. I'm like back in the way, hoping the Thunder.
I gotta go. The Pope's at the door, taking away my Catholic card.
Absolutely. Well, that actually does wrap us up. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks so much, Jeff, for coming on. Where can people find you?
You can find me all over the place. I am on X and Blue Sky at BBTI_pod. Come check out the podcast over on YouTube. It's Bricks Behind the Ivy. We are a weekly Cubs podcast. We've got some fun stuff on there, including an award-winning Harry Carey impersonator that comes on and gives his opinion on the Cubs from the perspective of the late, great Harry Carey, which is always a real treat. But yeah, subscribe there. We're on all audio podcast platforms, so download, share, subscribe, like all the social media monikers. Please do all of them.
And as for your show to be named later, Andy, we're going to be back in time for the third round of the college football playoffs. We are going to take it off, and then by then we should have a name, maybe.
Hey, we might have a third baseman too.
We might have
all kinds of crazy things could happen. Although I have to say, Astros fans, I apologize to you. Bob Nightingale said the Astros are still in play for Alex Bregman, so it's almost certain that he's going to sign somewhere else.
Thanks, Boob. He's going to be a Ranger. And we haven't done this yet, but big shout out to Craig Harmon, because I guess we've ended up shouting him out on all 3 episodes. For Jeff, for Andy, I'm James Christopher, or Jim Christopher, whatever I'm going by these days. We will see you. Everybody have a happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. See you in 2025.
I don't care what the newsman says. Christmas is full of cheer. I don't care if you think it's a lie. Christmas will soon be here. I don't care about anything except hearing them sleigh bells ring a ding ding. I wish it was Christmas today. I wish it was Christmas today.